Come on down to Boost Mobile and turn your tax refund into 6 months of savings?
Nope, all wrong. You're on the radio touting Boost Mobile's 5G network. You gotta use your radio voice, like this. Come on down to Boost Mobile and get 6 months free when you buy 6 months on our best unlimited plans. Now you go.
This is just how my voice sounds.
Just say it like you mean it.
Okay.
Plus, enter to win up to $10,000 and double your tax refund.
Oh, my.
Requires upfront payment, taxes and fees extra. Terms and exclusions apply. Visit boostmobile.com for full offer terms and sweeps details.
Ahora en Verizon, obtén nuestro mejor precio. Ahorra en 4 líneas nuevas en Unlimited Welcome y en 4 teléfonos nuevos para toda la familia al intercambiar hasta 4 teléfonos de Apple, Google o Samsung. Tú eliges entre nuestros mejores modelos. Uno para mamá, papá, los niños o la tía que manda audios de 5 minutos. Solo en la red con la que puedes contar. Verizon. Unlimited 5G, 4G LTE podrían ser temporalmente más lentos que los de otro tráfico durante una congestión. Roaming de datos nacional a velocidades 2G. Se aplican términos adicionales para cada oferta de teléfono. Visita tu tienda Verizon más cercana para detalles.
From ADT comes Trusted Neighbor, the new standard in home access. Through the ADT Plus app, easily grant and automate event-based or scheduled access for neighbors, friends, and helpers. Notify trusted individuals of events like alarms or packages, and set access windows for planned guests or even the dog walker without interrupting your day. Visit ADT.com. When every second counts, count on ADT. Requires ADT Complete Pro monitoring plan and compatible devices. Copyright 2025 ADT LLC. All rights reserved.
Hi, I'm Christy Shriver, and we're here to discuss books that have changed the world and have changed us.
And I'm Gary Shriver, and this is the How to Love Lit podcast. This is part 2 of our 2-part series over the life and work of Gwendolyn Brooks. Obviously, 2 episodes is not enough to truly explore the range of a writer who wrote and published for almost 70 years. Her work evolved, as did the nation and the city in which she lived, from 1917 until her passing in year 2000. Her writing is an expression of what it meant to be an African-American woman in the 20th century. It's a response to the politics of the United States of the era, but it's also more. It's poetry as activism. She used it and her influence to engage a population that was at risk. She dedicated her life to the elevation of the black family, which she believed was under attack. In her words, relations between men and women seemed disordered. And it was a movement she cared so deeply about. And at the later part of her life, she was completely devoted to this cause. And Gwendolyn Brooks, as a writer, influenced the direction of American literature quite literally. But her legacy lives not only in the over 20 books that she published, but through the thousands of people she engaged through workshops, through lectures, contests, and letters of encouragement. Today, we will speak about her work as an activist poet, but really we will spend less time talking about her and more time reading some of her most evocative works, many of which need little by way of explanation.
Well, you're right when you say sometimes you don't need to explain much about a Gwendolyn Brooks poem. I mean, she's one of the few poets that can be understood just when you listen to somebody read it out loud. And although there's a lot we could talk about her syntax and sound devices and how she mixed African styles with jazz, with her irony, her symbolism, for the most part, the technical stuff is not really what people like about her work. It's not why people read it. They read it because it's compelling, and her poems are readable. Anyone can understand them, and we'll see that this episode. Another thing you can say about her poetry is that her poetry is particularly empathetic. Her poems are not about her personal experience. They're about the experience of her intended reader, which was a very specific audience, the Black community. A reader, even one that's not African American, will soon feel seen when they read her poetry. In this episode, we're going to trace that element of her work, her empathy, across her career. Brooks seems to not just know what people are feeling, but she actually cares about the circumstances of their lives. She understands and empathizes, but she's able to do this without judgment. She does not condemn anyone for their mistakes, and nobody is condemned for a bad choice in a Brooks poem. You are more than your worst choices. You're also more than your best. Everyone matters for Gwendolyn Brooks. The poor, the depressed, the violent, the abusive, the abused, the old, the young. And we know this because that's who she wrote about. But perhaps more unusually, we know this because Brooks invested herself. She invested her own money, her time in Black urban centers around this country. She didn't live a wealthy lifestyle, and she could have. She spent her fortune on the people she cared about so much. Her time with the urban poor is what her poetry is about. It's authentic because it's where she spent her time, even after she was world famous. Over the course of her life, she spent a large amount of her personal money sponsoring poetry contests. She would pay, giving out financial awards, lecturing, and reading poetry to students in underprivileged communities. She funded student trips to Africa. She anthologized and subsidized student poetry books. She performed readings and held workshops across the country in underprivileged schools. She also did this in universities, and she even did it in prisons and other reformatories. She had a long-standing working relationship, if you can believe this, with gang members, teaching them how to read and write. She was concerned primarily and deeply with the condition of the African-American family. She felt it was deteriorating, and it was foundational if the African-American community was going to be vibrant. So she went to work, helping men and women, boys and girls. She wanted her writing to make a difference. She believed that helping people write for themselves was helping them think, and this empowered them to make difficult choices that ultimately would improve their lives.
And so we begin hitting some of her greatest hits. And Christy, we will read several of her poems, mostly in the chronological order they were published, but we will start with her two most anthologized and likely most famous poems, We Real Cool and The Bean Eaters, both of which are in most American 10th grade textbooks across the country to this day. They were both published in her book, also titled The Bean Eaters. It was published in 1960.
The Pool Players, 7 at the Golden Shovel. We real cool. We left school. We lurk late. We strike straight. We sing sin. We thin gin. We jazz June. We die soon. You know, this is actually a hard poem to read out loud. I'm not sure I got it right, but I did watch Gwendolyn Brooks read it a couple of times on YouTube to see if I could do it the way she did it, at least semi. I mean, she recited this poem almost everywhere she went because everyone wanted to hear her recite this poem. Personally, she said, I think it's overrated. And that wasn't because she didn't like it. She did like it. But she wrote a lot of poems, and a lot of them were more political than this one, and a lot of them were stronger than this one. And I think it kind of surprised her that everyone really likes this very seemingly simple poem.
So when she reads it, she overemphasizes the word we?
Correct, because it's at the end of the line. So the sentence starts with the first word on the line previous to the rest of the sentence.
Well, it looks funny on the page. I mean, all the sentences have 3 words in them. Each line has 4 words, which means she starts the new sentence after the people on the line and finishes each line with the word we. I mean, you know, it looks weird, especially for those of us who are not good poetry out loud readers.
I know, it does. She starts, by telling us who these people are. The pool players. She says there are 7. Notice that that's an archetypal number that symbolizes completeness. Perhaps she's saying all of them. I don't know. But these 7 seem to have congregated at the golden shovel. Gold, of course, represents wealth, but a shovel is something that we use to dig. So Put those symbols together in your mind however you want. But clearly we have 7 black teenagers congregating at a bar called the Golden Shovel Playing Pool. Another feature of this poem is not just how it looks on the page, each line having only 4 words, but how the poem sounds. We see it from the beginning. Pool players, 7 with a shovel. You can't not hear the alliteration. Now remember, alliteration is when the first letter of the words are close enough that they start with the same sound and you can hear that. It connects the words. She alliterates everything in this poem. So pool players, PP. She also rhymes everything in this poem, and they're not all full rhymes. Some of them are only half rhymes, which means they don't quite rhyme, but they're intentionally connected. Almost all the words are connected to each other in some way, perhaps indicating a connection between the events that she describes. Maybe she's showing the order that things occur. Real cool, lurk late, sing sin, thin gin. All of it connects till you get to the last 2 words, interestingly enough. Then the connection breaks. Die soon. That neither rhymes nor alliterates. The poem is ironic, but it's also empathetic. It can be read, and I think it should probably be read, angry, because we see consequences of the choices made by the pool players. So let's go through the poem. At the beginning, the sounds are kind of fun. The tone feels fun. We real cool. One thing to remember about sound in poetry, sound doesn't create meaning, but it does create emphasis and it creates connections. Sounds can't mean anything by themselves. They're just sounds. But words have the meaning, and it's with the words that we can pack the punch. So in this poem, we see the boys in the pool hall, and they're thinking, as a lot of teenagers would, that they're really cool. But why are they really cool? Because they are skipping school. Notice how she connects being cool with skipping school. Gary, before we talk about what these words mean, I do want to talk about the 60s or in the late 50s, the era that she wrote the poem. Gwendolyn Brooks, this was published in 1960. The poem itself was written in 1959. I know context isn't everything and poems can be universal, but she is an intentionally political writer. I think it's interesting to know what specifically she was concerned about. What about the world she was in is making her mad? This poem has a lot of irony in it. They're supposed to be sarcastic. Even this, we real cool. There's a lot of things that might concern boys in the 60s, especially black boys. And why would they, in particular, be skipping school?
Sure, and I think it's fair to read her works in a political way because she wanted that. In fact, talking about this book in particular, Brooks was criticized about it for being too political because a lot of her poems were, and said this. She said this in an interview about them. To be black is to be political. And she went on to add, to be anything else in this world as it is socially constructed is political. So she saw herself in that way. And of course, this is a woman who famously used domestic spaces to talk about political things. But to get to your point, war was a constant presence in this period, as was the threat of going to war for every young male, especially every young poor male during this time period. Remember, in the United States, there was a mandatory draft that made young men go to war up through 1973. And America was at war on 2 fronts during this time period. There was the Korean War, and then after that, the Vietnam War. And over 1.5 million young men were sent to Korea through the draft, and well over 2 million were sent to Vietnam. But remember that schools were also front and center during the struggle for civil rights. The very important Brown versus Board of Education of Topeka desegregated schools in 1954. That was not well received by many white communities across the South. There was the backlash in many places, and one of the most notable was in 1957 at Central High School in Little Rock, where President Eisenhower had to send in 1,000 U.S. Army paratroopers to protect African-American students entering their newly integrated school. So it's easy to see how young African-American men might not value going to school or being on the radar of the government. all the problems of politics play out in domestic places, meaning in people's homes. And this is what Brooks is exploring here. I mean, it's not that she's supportive of the choices of these boys, but you don't see her judging them. In this poem, as in so many of her other poems about children and teenagers, and there are a lot, by the way, we watch the politics of the moment play out in the lives of young African-American males.
Well, I told you I watched those YouTubes of Brooks reading the poem, and in one video I watched, the interviewer asked her what inspired this particular poem, and he wanted to know if she had just made it up, and she said, well, I kind of did. One day she was driving in Bronzeville near where she lived, and she looked out the window of her car, and she looked into a little bar that was on the side of the road. And in the bar, and it had a different name than the one in the poem, she saw some teenage males just loitering there when they should have been in school. And the idea of the poem came to her as she thought about their experience, about why they were there. The poem is from the perspective of the young men. They were skipping school, so of course they would consider themselves cool, but they're doing more than skipping school. She goes on to say they're lurking late, which is something that would happen well after the school day. That word lurk, it has connotations of stalking, of getting into trouble. We use that word today a lot of times to refer to people who hang out online in chat rooms. It doesn't mean you're a criminal necessarily, but it does imply you are hanging out and looking to, and you're open maybe to activities that you probably shouldn't be doing. If you're lurking late, the things you would be doing would be at night, and maybe you wouldn't have had your own initiative, but you are certainly allowing yourself to get into trouble. So then we say strike straight. Again, this phrase can be taken several different ways. It can be literal. You're striking pool balls. Maybe this means you're good at pool. Maybe they're playing pool in an excellent way. Maybe they're good at the game. But there's symbolism even there. Notice how the poem is in the first person plural. They're speaking as a group. They want a group identity. They want to be part of something. The words strike straight evoke confidence as well. Like these young men, they just know they're going to win at this game that they're playing. But strike is a brutal word. If you strike something, you hit something hard, and we see the beginning of a hint of violence. Are they good at violence? Or are they good at pool? What is their game? Which leads us to the next line. Sing sin. Sin means you're doing something wrong. You're at least violating your own conscience. Sing is something that's happy. It's a celebration. But these young men are celebrating sin. They're not ashamed of doing things that are bad, perhaps violent, but certainly against their own code of ethics. And it's something they celebrate. Thin gin. They're drinking. Then we see the next phrase, Jazz June, which might be the most interesting because it's open to several interpretations. Jazz, of course, is a type of music, but jazz is also a slang word for sex. The word June is also interesting. It's a woman's name. In the YouTube interview that I watched, the interviewer asked about this because it could be interpreted as rape. Brooks says in the poem, well, she didn't mean it necessarily that way. She was using the word June as a symbol for society in general. There's also the idea that June is a month of the year. I mean, it doesn't matter, really. You can interpret it various ways, and I would argue that you should probably interpret all the ways. But at any rate, where you get is a dark place, because at this point, there's a dark turn. They're sticking it, however you understand it, whether it's society or a specific person, they're sticking it to the man. Maybe they're raping a woman. You can read it more innocently, that they're idling away their time in jazz bars. But in the end, look where the sin and the singing of sin is taking them.
You know, what I find interesting is that Brooks doesn't seem to be condemning these young men. there's a sense where she feels compassion for them even. And she's observing how they're thinking, the choices they're making. These guys don't come across as evil monsters, although this behavior is definitely negative. It's almost the idea that they could have been redeemed, and that's the tragedy.
Exactly. It's a tragedy. And that's what the final line is about. Die soon. Their death is not justifiable. Even if you see June as a victim of violence, she still feels sad for the boys. It's negative for them too. They will not survive this world. And it's possible they know this from the beginning of the poem. But they're young and they don't understand what it means to die soon. They may think that's cool too. In a sense, when you're young, death could sound cool. And that's part of what makes it even more a sad poem.
Well, it is. It's really sad. And even though the tone is upbeat almost the entire way through, let's read it again in its entirety.
The pool players, 7 at the Golden Shovel. We real cool. We left school. We lurk late. We strike straight. We sing sin. We thin gin. We jazz June. We die soon.
Well, the poem is political, and she seems to be saying society has failed these young men, even though they are wreaking havoc on their own world and they're proud of it.
Yeah, and we see Brooks empathizing with young African-American males. And in the next poem, though, she's going to shift directions, and we're going to take a look at an older African-American couple, not at the beginning of their lives, but at the end of their lives. And this couple is not rebelling against a system. They have accepted their lot in the system.
The Bean Eaters. They eat beans mostly, this old yellow pair. Dinner is a casual affair. Plain chipware on a plain and creaking wood, tin flatware. 2 who are mostly good, 2 who have lived their day, but keep putting on their clothes and putting things away. And remembering with twinklings and twinges as they lean over the beans in their rented back room that is full of beads and receipts and dolls and clothes, tobacco crumbs, vases, and fringes.
Again, this is one of her most popular poems, which I find amazing because it's sad. And in a sense, it too is political. I mean, again, she's talking about those kitchenette apartments that we referenced in the last episode, those places where she spent so much of her life. And she saw people spend their entire lives in one-room apartments. The kitchenette for her often was a controlling metaphor for the effects of poverty, the devastating effects of poverty. In her own life, it took a toll. I mean, her son almost died of bronchopneumonia in a kitchenette. It symbolized the discouragement of working, and getting nowhere. The poem in particular raises questions of hunger and poverty in the lives of good, or at least she says, mostly good people. I mean, we see an ordinary elderly couple. Their dishes are cracked. They're described as yellow. They're eating mostly beans. Again, beans kind of being a symbol of poverty because they can't necessarily afford meat.
Notice after all these years, they don't even own the space where they live. And this is Brooks making a subtle political reminder that white tenement owners kept rents high. And with controlled housing, African Americans often had no other options during this time period because of racially restrictive house covenants. And this political injustice touched the lives of ordinary good people.
And so we have an elderly couple living in a rented back room full of the artifacts of their lives. And they're persevering every day, putting on their clothes, putting things away. And in the third stanza that we get to, and what people find endearing and beautiful about this couple is the remembering. She reiterates, remembering with twinklings and twinges. And that's a nice turn of phrase. I mean, you twinkle because you have so many happy memories. You twinge because you also have cringe-worthy ones. I mean, maybe they're sad, maybe they're awkward, maybe they're awful. But you see the contrast here. twinklings and twinges. It's nice. And the couple has been through together so much, share their memories, and the room that they're in reflects that. It's full of beads, receipts, dolls, clothes, tobacco crumbs, vases, fringes, all the things of life itself. And that's not even dependent of whether you're rich or poor. In some sense, life does come down to remembering.
So do you think she condemns society in this one?
I think it can be read that way. I mean, it's sad that they're in the back room and they're eating beans. It certainly shouldn't be that way. So in that sense, it's political. But I think there's also a reading where this is a simple glimpse into domestic life, the domestic life of the poor, the good people who are poor and have endured a life of hardship, and they've survived. And there's a sense of hope in that.
Well, again, it certainly is deeply empathetic.
It is. That's it exactly. Gwendolyn Brooks, in all of her poems, sees us. I mean, lots of poets see themselves, and we see our experiences when we read poems that we can identify with. But Gwendolyn Brooks sees herself as less important than the people that she writes about. She sees us, the reader, as the people she's writing about. It's a very interesting and unique trait. Well, in 1967, she goes from trying to speak to all people about the experiences of African Americans to speaking directly to the African American community. There is a marked shift in Gwendolyn Brooks. In some ways, she totally radicalizes, at least for a period of time. And this goes back to an experience that she had in 1967 when she went to Nashville, Tennessee, which, by the way, is just up the road from us, to a historically black university, Fisk University. She went to attend the second Black Writers Conference. And there, whatever happened there, the lectures that she heard, the experiences that she had, rocked her world and changed what she wanted to do with her writing. In some ways, she got really excited. She also got angry, but she definitely got creative. She got a new direction. In her own words, this is what she says. Until 1967, my own blackness did not confront me with the shrill spelling of itself. Yet, although almost secretly, I had always felt that to be black was good.
Well, of course, this led her to a lot of activism at that point. And remember, at this point in her life, she has a high profile in the United States. And remember, she'd already won a Pulitzer Prize, among other things. But what does she do with all of that? She was not a materialistic person. She really had no interest in collecting a lot of possessions or buying a lot of things. And at this conference, she gets a vision as to her role. She sees herself as a writer to use her platform as a guide in the black community.
Correct. And by guide, I think what she was trying to do is guide people out of poverty, guide them into education, guide them into free expression. Let me quote her so we can get her exact words on the topic. The prevailing understanding, black literature is literature by blacks about blacks directed to blacks. Essential black literature is the distillation of black life. Black life is different from white life, different in nuance, different in nitty-gritty, different from birth, different in death. Now the address must be to blacks. There are things to be said to black brothers and sisters, and these things are to be said forthright, without frill, and without fear of a white presence.
And so she went home to Chicago and went to work, and it's remarkable what all she did. She started poetry contests, and she gave out awards, and she spoke to students everywhere. Of course, one of her most notable contributions was taking on the infamous Blackstone Rangers gang, or the Black Pea Stones, and she began a poetry workshop for interested gang members, and gang members showed up. They met at First Presbyterian Church and they rehearsed productions of their work. The poetry workshop grew and, it became an integral part of both the life of the community, but also a part of her life as well. And among other things, Brooks produced an anthology of their works, which she titled Jump Bad.
Can you imagine showing up at that poetry class? All these guys. But anyway, you can see how after 1967, her poetry was just going to be different. we can feel it different. I mean, we're going to read some. She's angrier. She's also proactive. I mean, she's speaking to her community, not about her community. The next poem is an example of this. It's from this later period, but it's also about young people dying, which is, what the one about the pool players was about. Except instead of just commenting about young people dying, this time she's talking to young people who are considering taking their own lives. This poem is still published in high school textbooks as well, and today is called Too Young to Die. I do want to say, because it's about suicide, it can be triggering, so please be forewarned.
Sit down, inhale, exhale. The gun will wait. The lake will wait. The tall gall and the small seductive vial will wait. We'll wait. We'll wait a week. We'll wait through April. You do not have to die this certain day. Death will abide. It will pamper your postponement. I assure you death will wait. Death has a lot of time. Death can attend to you tomorrow or next week. Death is just down the street, is most obliging neighbor, and it can meet you any moment. You need not die today. Stay here through pout or pain or peskiness. Stay here. See what the news is going to be tomorrow. Graves grow no green that you can use. Remember, green's your color. You are spring. She's extended her grace to one more group, the despairing and the hopeless. And she sees this hopelessness, and so she's going to extend hope.
Yes, that's exactly what she does. You are spring. It's a wonderful line. I mean, spring is about life emerging from death. It's about renewal. It's about making something new. It's about creation. And she sees that in people, and she sees that in her own African American community. It's what she saw working with those gang members in Chicago. She was no longer content to describe the despair of the poor. She wanted to engage it. And this was a bit radical. And sometimes her radicalism wasn't well received, and it's likely she made a few missteps along the way. She had some problems clear with her own life, and her heart, though, was always in the right place. She was determined to impact the Black family. She worked hard for the betterment of young people.
And she was rewarded for this, not financially, of course, but she spent her own money really funding her projects. But with her incredible influence, it only grew throughout the decade of the 70s. And finally, on January 3rd, 1980, she was actually invited to read at the White House.
The poem she chose to read at the White House was actually one that she wrote back in 1945, which is surprising. It's one of her most famous. It's also one of her most controversial. It's called The Mother. It's about a mother having an abortion. There is no documentation that this is autobiographical. We don't know. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. It's clearly personal at some level. Again, I want to remind you, because of the topic, this poem is triggering. But if you remember your history, all her growing up years, abortion had been illegal. And in Bronzeville, it was very common, maybe more so than it would have been in other affluent communities.
Well, national statistics tell us that in the 1970s, abortions among African American women were 2 to 3 times higher than among white women. And in 1973, abortion is legalized at the national level. But before that, the rates were 2 to 4 times higher among Black women than among white women. And Black women accounted for a disproportionate amount of botched abortions that resulted in hospitalizations and even death. So even as today, this is a personal topic, it was perhaps even more so throughout Brooks's life, which may explain why she chose to talk about it during her visit at the White House.
Again, I want to point out this poem is not about judgment. She's not judging girls who get abortions. She's not judging girls who don't. It's not about female empowerment or even about family. It makes no judgment about whether you should be pro-life or pro-choice. She's not telling anyone what to do, but she's discussing the reality as she understands and sees it being experienced in her own African American community. It's an empathetic understanding about what the experience produces long after the procedure has come and gone. And I want to point out that as with all of her poems, she doesn't argue that this poem expresses the experience of all women, but at least it expresses the experience of the one in the poem. I'll read this one. Abortions will not let you forget. You remember the children you got that you did not get. The damp small pulps with the little or with no hair, the singers and workers that never handled the air. You will never neglect or beat them or silence or buy them a sweet. You will never wind up the sucking thumb or scuttle off ghosts that come. You will never leave them, controlling your luscious sigh, return for a snack of them with gobbling mother eye. I have heard in the voices of the wind, the voices of my dim, killed children. I have contracted, I have eased my dimmed ears at the breast that could never suck. I have said sweets if I sinned, if I seized your luck and your lies from your unfinished reach, if I stole your births and your names, your straight baby tears and your games, your stilted or lovely loves, your tumults, your marriages, aches, your deaths, if I poisoned the beginning of your breaths, believe that even in my deliberates, I was not deliberate. Though why should I whine? Whine that the crime was other than mine, since anyhow you are dead. Or rather, or instead, you were never made. But that too, I am afraid, is faulty. Oh, what shall I say? How is the truth to be said? You were born, you had a body, you died. It is just that you never giggled or planned or cried. Believe me, I loved you all. Believe me, I knew you, though faintly, and I loved you all.
The poem was well received, and since then has been well received, and in fact is still one of her most popular poems. And after her reading at the White House, she was appointed to the Presidential Commission on the National Agenda for the 80s, and she was also invited to be a guest in the Soviet Union at the Conference of Prominent Soviet and American Writers. And 1983, she was invited to England to judge the Sotheby's International Poetry Contest. And it wasn't long after that, in 1985, that she was named the poetry consultant to the Library of Congress. And unsurprisingly, her time in D.C. was spent exactly like she spent it in Chicago, visiting inner city schools, sponsoring poetry contests out of her own pocket, and encouraging students to read the newspapers and magazines and history and science books and to think and to put those words on paper. You know, to the D.C. crowd, she is quoted as saying, "Think, your thoughts will inspire more poems." You know, in all this woeful world of thud and thump and thunder.
The last poem that we're going to read today comes again from her later years, from a collection that was published in 1970. The title of the poem is The Life of Lincoln West, and it's about a child who is ugly. And after explaining to the reader how ugly the child truly is, we're introduced to three people who should love, care for the child, or at least not care that the child's ugly. But that's not their reaction, not the reaction of the mother, the father, or the teacher. The mother just throws them in with all of her things. The father can't bear the sight of him. And the teacher tried to be pleasant, but was repulsed. Let's get started.
Ugliest little boy that everyone ever saw, and that is what everyone said. Even to his mother it was apparent. When the blue apron nurse came into the northeast end of the maternity ward, bearing his squeals and plump bottom looped up in a scant receiving blanket, bending to pass the bundle carefully into the waiting mother's hands, that this was no cute little ugliness, no sly baby waywardness that was going to inch away as would baby fat, baby curl, and baby spot rash. The pendulous lip, the branching ears, the eyes so wide and wild, the vague, unvibrant brown of the skin, and most disturbing, the great head. These components of that look bespoke the sure fiber, the deep grain. His father could not bear the sight of him. His mother high-piled her pretty dyed hair and put him among her hairpins and sweethearts, dance slippers, Tom paper roses. He was not less than these. He was not more. As the little Lincoln grew ugly upward and out, he began to understand that something was wrong. His little ways of trying to please his father, the bringing of matches, the jumping aside at warning sound of oh so large and rushing stride, the smile that gave and gave and gave, unsuccessful. Even Christmases and Easters were spoiled. He would be sitting at the family feasting table, really delighting in the displays of mashed potatoes and the rich golden fat crust of the ham or the festive fowl, when he would look up and find somebody feeling indignant about him. What a pity, what a pity. No love for one so loving. The little Lincoln loved everybody. Ants, the changing caterpillar, his much missing mother, his kindergarten teacher. His kindergarten teacher, whose concern for him was composed of 1 part sympathy and 2 parts repulsion. The others ran up with their little drawings. He ran up with his. She tried to be as pleasant with him as others, but it was difficult, for she was all pretty, all daintiness, all tiny vanilla, with blue eyes and fluffy sun hair. One afternoon she saw him in the hall, looking bleak against the wall. It was strange because the bell had long since rung and no other child was in sight. Pity flooded her. She buttoned her gloves and suggested cheerfully that she walk him home. She started out bravely, holding him by the hand, but she had not walked far before she regretted it. The little monkey. Must everyone look? And clutching her hand like that, literally pinching it. At 7, the little Lincoln loved the brother and the sister who moved next door. Handsome, well-dressed, charitable often to him, they enjoyed him because he was resourceful, made up games, told stories, but when their more acceptable friends came, they turned their handsome backs on him. He hated himself for his feeling of well-being when with them despite everything. He spent much time looking at himself in mirrors. What could be done? But there was no shrinking his head. There was no binding his ears. "Don't touch me," cried the little fairy-like being in the playground. Her name was Nerissa. The many children were playing tag, but when he caught her, she recoiled, jerked free, and ran. It was like all the rainbow that ever was going off forever, all the sparklings in the sunset west. One day, while he was yet 7, a thing happened. In the downtown movies with his mother, a white man sat in the seat beside him, whispered loudly to a companion, and pointed at the little Link. "There, that's the kind I've been wanting to show you. One of the best examples of their species. Not like those deluded Negroes you see so much of on the streets these days, but the real thing. Black, ugly, and odd. You can see the savagery, the blunt blankness. That is the real thing." His mother, her hair had never looked so red around the dark brown velvet of her face, jumped up and shrieked, "Go to!" She did not finish. She yanked to his feet the little Lincoln, who was sitting there, staring in fascination at his assessor, at the author of his new idea. All the way home he was happy. Of course he had not liked the word ugly, but, after all, should he not be used to that by now? What had struck him among words and meanings he could little understand was the phrase, "the real thing." He didn't know quite why, but he liked that. He liked that very much. When he was hurt, too much stared at, too much left alone, he thought about that. He told himself, after all, "I'm the real thing." It comforted him.
Again, Brooks is empathetic. It's a story, but what's the story about? I mean, at first you think it's about the reader not judging other people for being ugly, but there's a twist. It's not necessarily about making us feel bad for judging people by their looks. It's about Lincoln, and it's about how Lincoln sees himself, not how other people see him. Lincoln has an epiphany, and that's the pivotal moment there at the end. These 2 white men come in and they mock him, but their words don't sting. In fact, they're encouraging. They say he's ugly, but so is everyone else in the poem. What they say that's different is they say that he's the real thing. Of course, what are they talking about? From Lincoln's perspective, he doesn't quite know, but we know that this is a poem about isolation. Lincoln West has been isolated the entire poem because of how he looks. It seems perhaps he looks too black. This poem is obviously focused on race and racial beauty standards, but you ask, how do we know this? Well, first of all, we know it's about race because race is emphasized. The teacher, although not declared, seems to be white. The men who come in at the end we're told that they're white. But look at Lincoln's mother. At the moment she's standing up to the men, she's described as having hair that never looked so red. African Americans don't have naturally red hair. This is a woman who is assimilated into white culture. And that's where you get the subtext that, the closer you align, perhaps, or at least people were viewing or may view, the closer you align to white beauty standards, the prettier you might be, at least in the eyes of the black community. The child, apparently because his features are very black, cannot assimilate in any way. That's why they call him the real thing. He's the real authentic African American, according to the two white men in the poem. And instead of making Lincoln West sad by the fact that he can't blend in, it makes him happy because he gets to be the most authentic of them all.
Well, what I find interesting about this poem is that there is no way a white person can either read this poem or hear this poem without cringing. I mean, it's very uncomfortable to read.
Oh, I know. And Gwendolyn Brooks, I think she does that by design in a lot of her works. We can see this from other details, but look at some other specific things about this poem. The boy's name is Lincoln, obviously a tribute to Abraham Lincoln, who emancipated African Americans from slavery. But his last name is West. In the United States, the West has always symbolized the frontier, a new land, being a pioneer. And that's really what the poem is about. It's about being a pioneer, about having pride in who you are, what you look like, where you come from, where you're going, even if it's not like anyone else. Brooks in her later years, and this was a later poem, often talked about pride. She said this, "I, who have gone the gamut from an almost angry rejection of my dark skin by some of my brainwashed brothers and sisters to a surprised queenhood in the new black sun, I am qualified to enter at least the kindergarten of a new consciousness and trudge towards progress." And that's what she believed. She believed that the African American family needed a good shot of pride, and that's what she wanted to give them.
Well, I want to end with a final quote by her from her later years. Obviously, I'm not an African American, and I'm not a woman, nor do I pretend to speak for either group, so I want to end with letting Brooks, an African American woman, speak for herself. And this is what she had to say. "There is indeed a new black today. He is different from any the world has known. He's a tall walker, almost firm. By many of his own brothers he is not understood, and he is understood by no white. Not the wise white, not the schooled white, not the kind white. Your least prerequisite toward an understanding of the new black is an exceptional doctorate which can be conferred only upon those with the proper properties of bitter birth and intrinsic sorrow. I know this is infuriating, especially to those professional Negro understanders, some of them very kind, with special portfolio, special savvy, but I cannot say anything other because nothing other is the truth."
And Gwendolyn Brooks wanted to always speak truth. She was of the mindset, and she held true to that perspective her entire life. She didn't believe race could be ignored. She didn't believe it could be defined by another person. It's culture. But as such, it's something each person, no matter your race, should embrace, cherish, reserve, and respect.
She viewed the African American family as unique because it has experienced, and it does experience, incredibly unique hardships, and that these must be addressed by the African American community for the betterment of African American families. And for her, this was personal, and she gave her life to this idea and to this cause. And, her poetry and legacy obviously are appreciated by people of all races, but her commitment and engagement in the urban Black communities in favor of the betterment of African-American family was a labor of love, and it was her model of selflessness.
In Brooks's 1989 poem, Instructions to Myself, she gives herself advice on how to live out the end of life. In her honor, we want to give her the last word by reading the last words of that poem. Love, deplore, do less, do more, accept, refuse, die in use.
Remarkable advice from a remarkable woman. So thank you for listening and being with us today. This concludes our discussion of Gwendolyn Brooks and her poetry. And remember, if you enjoyed this episode, please pass it forward to a friend. And also, don't forget to follow us on social media, on Instagram, Facebook. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Find us on your podcast app. Check out our website, howtolovelitpodcast.com. And remember, it's when you share that we grow. And thank you for helping us make great literature accessible to as many people as possible.
Peace out.
To get people excited about Boost Mobile's new nationwide 5G network, we're offering unlimited talk, text, and data for $25 a month.
Forever.
Even if you have a baby.
Even if your baby has a baby.
Even if you grow old and wrinkly and you start repeating yourself.
Even if you start repeating yourself.
Even if you're on your deathbed and you need to make one last call.
Or text.
Right, or text. The long-lost son you abandoned at birth.
You'll still get unlimited talk, text, and data for just $25 a month with Boost Mobile.
Forever!
After 30 gigabytes, customers may experience slower speeds. Customers will pay $25 a month as long as they remain active on the Boost Unlimited plan.
Forever.
Does it ever feel like you're a marketing professional just speaking into the void? Well, with LinkedIn ads, you can know you're reaching the right decision makers. You can even target buyers by job title, industry, company, seniority, skills. Wait, did I say job title yet? Get started today and see how you can avoid the void and reach the right buyers with LinkedIn ads. We'll even give you a $100 credit on your next campaign. Get started at linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply.
Owning a home is a dream come true, but keeping it comfortable? Temperature Pro understands that your HVAC system is the heart of your home's comfort. When it needs attention, you deserve service that's fast, transparent, and reliable. More than just a repair company, they're your home's partner, offering professional service that respects your space and your family. For routine maintenance or an unexpected breakdown, trust Temperature Pro to keep your home running smoothly with no surprises on pricing. Temperature Pro, your comfort is our promise.